whenever we were still part of EMMC and go on these youth leader retreats together. And I always admired Ike, his love that he had for serving, his passion for kids at that time, and now he's moved on to lead pastor at the church. And so we've had a relationship with him for coming up 18, 19 years, and it's kind of been on and off. He's done some youth retreats for us, and so Ike, God bless you.
Thank you. Where do I start with Pete?
I still have the mic.
I know you have the mic, and could you kill his mic now, please? So, you didn't say anything yesterday when I moved my pulpit up. It's my job to drop my water bottle, so there we go. You guys are a lot stronger. I know a lot of you guys are like, just pick the thing up and move it, but I'm not that strong. But, hey, what's the best thing about Sublette? Come on, it's your town, folks. You're all like, I'm from another town. I don't. Wide open, so you don't even live here. What's the best thing about Sublette? The 83? Oh! Where are the elders? Could we, Anyway, come on. This is called interaction. The community. Anyone else? This church. Same. That's a restaurant. All right, so for the most part, you seem to like this community, but that's cool because I want to talk today a little bit about your community. Now, if you're not from Sublette, that's then you need to think about your own community. But I think as we sang that song, just this declaration of what Christ has done in me, that's a little bit what we focused on today. And Pete, thank you for kind of bringing us back up to speed on where we were yesterday. But one of the things that has really, hit me as I've listened to some of you and just kind of watched in this community, and Maria and I, we went and drove, I think it's almost safe to say, every street in Sublette this morning in about 2 minutes. And so it was fantastic. We covered the whole community, and our odometer reader didn't even turn over. So it was amazing. But no, it's as I drive through this community, it's a beautiful place. It's I drove out just I'm at the corner there, and I drove about 3 minutes, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I just parked in the middle of the intersection on a dirt road. You don't do that in Ontario where I live. You would have someone there right away going, hey, you're holding up traffic. I parked there in the middle of nowhere, got out, and my wife and I, we like the open space. We love that. And so I'm like, I'm going to sit here and just reflect for a while and just take in the sunrise and enjoy this moment. And then about a minute and a half later, I was bored and got back in my car and drove somewhere else because I just don't have the patience for those kind of things. But, the thing that I miss about, this area, or I would miss very quickly about this area is back home, it seems like sometimes you don't know where town starts and where it ends. It just kind of bleeds into everything. And I think for you as a church and for you as a community, it's something beautiful about being able to actually say, we know where our community is. We know where our town is. And I know many of you live in different places, or you may live outside of the town. But I think it's an important thing just to kind of keep in mind as we talk about serving, is that sometimes we can find ourselves thinking that, well, I don't know where to serve. I don't know what to do, or I don't know who I would serve. And so tonight we're going to talk about the heart of a servant. And I think that this is something that goes very much in line with what we talked about yesterday. I see there's more of us here today, and so I want to just refresh really quickly. One of the things that I'm not here to do is to tell you how to serve. I'm not here to tell you where to serve or when to serve or what kind of things to do as part of service. What I really want you to wrestle with is your heart. And last night we looked at this idea of sin. If there's sin in our lives, it's very difficult to serve God when we have sin in our lives. And we use this image of our ship with its rudder broken, and and this lady says to the captain, don't worry about it because it's underwater, no one's going to see it. Well, we all understand that just because no one sees it doesn't mean that it's not very problematic. That just because the rudder can't be seen doesn't mean that it isn't going to have a major impact on the destination of that ship. And the same is true with sin. Some of us have gotten really good at burying our sin and hiding our sin, but that doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact on the destination of our lives. Sin is something God takes extremely serious. And so I think these sermons are recorded. If you missed last night, I would encourage you to watch it, because I think it's one of those that you kind of need to have at the foundation of your life and saying, before I commit myself to serving God, I need to wrestle with what's going on in my own life. And today we want to talk about that some more, and we want to look at the heart of a servant. And I want to tell you two quick little stories. The first one is, looking at a student, an MIT student who was doing some research, and he's doing a job interview, and he'd done everything that was in place. And so he's sitting down now with the human resource person and this young engineer fresh out of MIT. They were asking him, what kind of a salary, what kind of a benefit package are you expecting if you're going to work for this company? And so the student replies, he says, well, I'm thinking in the neighborhood of $140,000 a year, depending on the benefit package. Well, what would you say about so the person's like, oh, okay. And so then the person replies, well, what would you say to a package of 5-week vacation, 14 paid holidays, full medical and dental, company matching retirement fund up to 50% of salary, and a company car lease every 2 years? Say maybe a red Corvette or something like that. And the student's eyes just open wide, and he's like, wow, are you kidding? Like, seriously, are you kidding me? And the person replies, well, yeah, but you started it, because obviously asking right straight off $140,000 is outrageous. Now, clearly this student is wanting to work for this company, not for the company. The student is like, I want to get a job and I want to work here, but I want to be the beneficiary of what I do. I meet with a lot of business people back home, and they say to me very often, like, my employees just don't get it. They all want raises, but if my company's not making money, I can't give them a raise. And it's one of these things that often I talk to employers, and they're like, some of the employees just don't understand that if I'm not doing well, how am I supposed to pay them? And so I think sometimes when we look at our jobs and when we look at our lives, we tend to focus on ourselves. And this is an example of a student who hasn't done a day's work with this company and yet already expects everything for himself. He expects to be the main focus because his heart wasn't in it for the company. His heart was in it for himself. There's a story about Mother Teresa, and she's told a story that is very different from this. She told of how one of their nuns had spent an entire day bathing the wounds of a dying beggar who was brought to them from the streets of Calcutta. Mother Teresa's voice dropped to a whisper as she told the hushed auditorium that in reality the nun had been washing the wounds of Jesus. She insisted that Christ tested the love of his followers by hiding in these grotesque disguises to see if we can still see him. A very different image of a person, this nun who's willing to bathe this beggar and to care for someone who is obviously not going to live much longer because of their injuries and because of their condition. But this person is in it not for themselves, not for what they can get out of it. They are in it for what they can do for other people. So tonight, I want every single one of us just to kind of ask ourselves, what is the condition of our heart? If we're going to ask you and challenge you to serve, if you're going to be challenged to consider serving in your community, in your family, in your church, in wherever you are, it's important for us to ask ourselves, so then why would you do it? Why would you serve? If you're asked to serve in this church, what is the motivation behind why you would serve it? Because yesterday we said there's a big difference between serving and just doing. If you've ever gone to a restaurant and someone just does their job and brings you your food and they're like, here you go, and walks away, there's a big difference between that and someone who actually comes to serve you and they bring you your food and they're like, hey, if you need anything else, let me know. I'm just over there. My name is such and such. Anything you need, let me know. I'm here to serve you. If you've been to a restaurant where they do that, it's quite significant because obviously this person is doing their job, but they're doing it with a completely different mindset, a completely different heart. And I think when we think of the church, it's important for us, every single one of us, to examine our own heart and say, okay, I want to be obedient. I want God to use me. I want God to accomplish his will in my life. So then what's the heart? If you're an usher, If you're a greeter, and I don't know if you guys handle bulletins and stuff like that in this church, but if you're like, here, have a bulletin, go find a seat. Big difference between that and actually greeting people and meeting people. If you're leading in worship and you're up here, and sorry, I'm not picking on the worship team. If you're up here and just because you like playing an instrument or you like being in front of people, that's going to eventually really show itself. It changes the heart that you have in the area you're serving, changes how you will serve. Now, I know this is being recorded, so hopefully people back home will never see this, but we've had to let people go of areas in the church where they're serving just because their heart's not in the right place. We've had to literally tell people, it's like, you know what? You're doing the job, but it's obvious that your heart's not at it. You're dragging the whole team down, and we would actually be better off without you than with you. And those can be difficult conversations, but sometimes the heart of a person is so, toxic almost, that when their heart is not in the right place, the last thing you really want them is serving in a certain area. And so I hope you're hearing me that tonight, you asking yourself, what is the condition of your heart, is so important when you consider serving. Now, there's a lot of kids here and teenagers, so let me break this down. We are not talking here just about doing something big in your community. Some of you kids, I want to try not to make any eye contact, and all the kids are like looking down, like, don't talk to me. My mom and dad right now are like, he's talking to you now. Some of you kids, listen carefully, you are serving your parents. Not as a slave. I know some of you, that's exactly how it feels, right? I've been to a few homes now for meals, and it's like you're doing the dishes, and like, oh my goodness, slave drivers, I get it. That's how I feel about my parents too. But, some of you are serving your parents. It's this beautiful, you're serving your siblings, you're serving family members. You need to understand that when you do something for someone that you didn't need to do something, that's serving. And so don't immediately be like, well, this doesn't mean anything for me because I'm not involved in the church yet, and I'm not involved in the community. I'm still too young. You start learning how to serve in your family. You start learning to serve with your siblings. You start learning to serve with your parents. You start learning to serve with cousins and grandma and grandpas, and it goes on. And if at that early age already you can say, you know what, I'm going to have a right heart. When I'm being asked to do something, I'm going to have a heart that isn't just like, well, what can I do? What can I get out of it for myself? It changes eventually the joy that you have in serving. And so I think tonight we want to look at this idea of the heart of a servant. And I think the mistake that we sometimes make is that we confuse serving with a hobby. We think it's going to always be fun. We think it's always going to go well. We think that every single time that we serve, it's going to feel like a hobby, Man, I'm going to be refreshed by it. I'm going to be, I'm going to enjoy every aspect of it. But the reality is serving is very, very different. Serving is so different from it because even though it may be an area of your gifting, music and different things like that, maybe it's an area of your gifting, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to come natural. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy. It doesn't mean that every time you do it, you're going to love it. Trust me, as a pastor, I have gone to church, stood in front of the whole congregation, and wished I was somewhere else because I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I'm just whatever, but every now and then, even though you may not feel like it, you're like, you know what, this is what God has called me to, and I'm going to have the best attitude I can. But if that's the attitude that you would always have, eventually you need to really ask yourself if you're in the right place. And so serving is very different than a hobby. And I think some people, and again, I don't know your church, I know my church, I think some people want to treat serving like it's a hobby. I should be enjoying this. So I'm picking on the sound people tonight and the crew in the back. I love doing media. I love doing video. I like, blah, blah, blah. I like doing sound, all those kind of things. And then all of a sudden one day, like, hey, we've got a funeral coming up or we've got a wedding coming up. We have a special event. Can you come out that night? Oh, no. No, oh man, I got something up. I can't be there for that. Suddenly you realize that, oh, I'm only in this for myself. I'm only in this for what I can get out of it. Because when we treat serving like a hobby, we have this idea that every time I serve, I'm going to somehow be refreshed, I'm going to somehow be energized. But you got to understand that serving is very different. Serving may take everything out of you at times. Serving may be very difficult. Serving may sometimes feel very sacrificial. This is why it's so important for you to examine your heart. Because here's what I've seen over this September will be 21 years in my church. I have seen people who have served with all their heart, or they have served with all this energy, and they got worn out, they got tired, they got frustrated. Instead of taking a break and examining their heart and getting right with God and getting just right with themselves, they just kept going. They're just going to do it, and eventually they end up bitter, angry, and then when someone wants to suggest doing something a little bit different, they'll say things like, well, we've always done it this, and and I've done this for so long, and we're not changing it now. And suddenly you realize now they're serving in an area, but they no longer do that job for the sake of helping people. They've now taken possession of that area that they're serving, and it's no longer about using that to help people. It's now about somehow maintaining a status quo for themselves. And at that moment, you recognize that these people have lost their heart for what they're doing. So again, emphasizing the importance of examining our heart. You might be someone that's working at your local high school, and maybe you're just like at our school, we are involved in our town, we're involved in quite a few schools, and people get up early every morning. We'll talk about this in a little bit, and they go serve breakfast, because in our community we have a lot of kids that go to school without breakfast. So at our local schools, we have breakfast programs that our church is a part of running, and that takes a lot of work. And so sometimes getting up in the morning and going there and making breakfast, even though it's not that difficult, but the kids come and they don't really say thank you, and they leave a mess. And eventually, if your heart becomes something that is not in it for the right reason, you will actually begin to resent the very people that you're meant to serve. So again, all that to say, I trust that tonight, whether it's helping your parents with the house chores, or whether it's, serving in your school or in your community or in your church, I want you to really wrestle with, what is the condition of my heart? Do I have a heart for service? This is why it's important then for us to be people who do not lose track of why we're doing it, because if we do, we become people who are no longer thankful for the opportunity that we have to serve. And so it's very important to have a heart of a servant, because if we don't, we will try to serve ourselves instead of serving other people. And so tonight I want to look at a passage in Philippians chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles with you, in this passage we read about how we are to have a same mindset as that of Jesus. And so let's read a few verses at a time, and then we'll just kind of dissect them. And so if you have your Bibles with you, Philippians chapter 2, verses 1. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Now, basically what Paul is saying here is that if we have received anything from Christ, anything whatsoever from Christ, then we should have the same mindset as that of Christ. I think every single person here, as a believer, would say, I've received something from Christ. I've received joy from him. I've received love from him. I've received comfort from him. I've received assurance of salvation from him. And the list goes on and on and on. And Paul is saying, if you have received anything at all from Christ, then you should strive to have the same mindset as Christ. Now listen to what that mindset is. Verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Now, I want you to say that with me, okay? Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Okay, so do that with me. All together. Look up at the screen, because maybe your translation's something different, okay? Verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Now, I want to ask you a question. How different would your life be if that was the approach that you took to everything? How different, and again, I'm going to pick on the kids, because I don't think I want you coming to church thinking, oh, this is for the parents, and this is for the youth, and this is for the older people, and this has nothing to do for me. Think about it, from young on to older, from the youngest person here to the oldest person. What if we would say, let's have a mindset that literally says that I will do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit? In other words, every single thing I'm going to do is going to be for the purpose of serving Jesus. I'm not going to live my life only for me to get what I can get out of it. Let's read the rest of the verse. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Now, I got to pause here for a second. This does not mean that you can degrade yourself. This does not mean that you are not valuable. This does not mean that you are not important. This does not mean that you should not value yourself. Look at what it says, in humility. In other words, recognizing that your identity is in God. Your identity is in Jesus Christ. So understanding that, you now humbly accept who you are in Christ, and you do not try to make yourself better than other people. Because if you view yourself as better than other people, I'm sorry, an arrogant person cannot truly serve other people. Okay, so do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. This is the heart of what it means to be a servant. We aren't in it for what we can get out of it. Our focus should not be on accomplishing our own agenda or somehow making a name for ourselves. So when we serve others, we are looking at how can I meet their needs, not how can I use this for my own agenda. Years ago, I had a young man come up to me, and he was very new to our church. And so he came up to me after one of the services and says, "Hey, Pastor Ike, I want to do what you do." I said, "Oh, okay, that's cool. Like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "I want to be up on that stage. I want to preach like you do. I want to do what you do." And I said, "Well, okay, well, why?" And he's like, "Oh, man, I see what you do, and I just really feel like that's what I should be doing. That's what I want to do." And so I talked to him for a little bit, and it didn't take very long to realize that this man, or this young guy, all he wanted was this. Everybody looking at me. I got the mic on. You're all quiet, listening to me. He wanted to be known. So I said to him, I said, "Okay, so are you willing to put the time in that it takes to even just write a sermon?" He's like, "Oh, I got tons of sermons ready. I got all kinds of things ready to go." And I looked at him and I said, "I will never let you on my stage. Your heart is all wrong." And he never came back to our church. Sometimes when we want to serve, it's so obvious that we have a wrong heart that other people see it right away. But sometimes for some of you, I'm thinking now of the people who've maybe been serving in an area for a long, long time. And you're tired. Trust me, I've been talking to Pastor Garrett, and he brags about how many of you are involved in this church, and that is awesome. So I want to just challenge some of you are maybe tired. You've been serving in your area for a long, long time. So all the more important for you to say, "Okay, God, is my heart still in this for you?" Let me continue picking on the ushers. We picked on them last night, carrying out dead people. In case you weren't here, go listen to the sermon. Just telling you, and you're like, "What the, Let's pick on the ushers some more. Maybe you've been ushering for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, and you don't even like people. Kind of makes it hard to be an usher. But, you're one of those people. You don't really like people, but, you look good, you're friendly, you're easy to connect with, and so you're good at what you do. You're really good at what you do. But if you're really honest, you're tired. Maybe you're a Sunday school teacher, and you love kids. You just don't like their parents. I get it. That's how I feel about, anyway. It's being recorded. Be nice. Or maybe you're a deacon. Maybe you're a leader. Maybe you're a youth ministry leader. You're in some area of ministry. You're in the kitchen. Man, we watched you guys were here early this morning, and you're making lunch for tomorrow. And whatever area you are in, I want you to listen carefully to this. I'm not encouraging you to stop serving. When you become tired, it is all the more important to examine your heart. Because a tired person will often become a selfish person. And when we become selfish in the area of serving, we begin to make it all about us. And when we make it all about us, it will have an impact on the people around us, and it will have an impact on the people whom we are serving. Rather, in humility, value others. not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of other people. Here's what I tell people very often when they come up to me and say, Pastor Ike, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm exhausted, and so we're going to we need to take a break. And so sometimes I'll say to people, like, what do you mean by taking a break? And they're like, well, we just need to take some time off. I'm like, okay, like a month, a week, a year? Oh, we don't know. Well, then you're not taking a break, you're quitting. So tell me, what do you mean by, and they're like, okay, we can have like a month off. That would be great. Okay, so what are you going to do so that during that time that you have off, you will come back to serving in this area with the same heart and passion with which you first started? So here's what I would challenge you. If you're tired in the area of ministry, I'm not asking you to, Pastor Garrett's getting nervous now. I'm not asking you to think about stopping serving in that area, but here's what I would ask you to do right now. Why did you start in the first place? Why did you start serving in that area in the first place? My guess is that you felt called to it in some way. And maybe over the years that you've been serving in that area, you've got tired and you've lost track of that. You've got so involved in the details of the area that you're serving, and maybe it got way more complicated. Man, you're like, I'm going to be on the board, I'm going to be an elder, I'm going to serve in this area. Now all of a sudden you're doing it, and it's like, whoa, this is a little bit more complicated than I thought. Praise God, it should be complicated because church is not easy. It is a complicated unit. So maybe for you tonight, the challenge is to say, okay, God, I want to go back to why I started in the first place. I love teenagers. I love children. I walked into this church and I felt welcome, so I wanted to make people feel welcome. I feel God has given me the gift of hospitality. So as a deacon, going into people's homes, making them feel welcome, making them feel connected, caring for their needs, when I make hospital visits, all those kind of things. That is why I wanted to do this in the first place. And if you are here today and you are someone who is tired in the area that you have been serving, ask God to restore your heart back to that area where you can serve with the same passion and the same love. Because just remember, a tired person can become a selfish person. Now, I hope you're hearing me in the heart from which I'm saying that, because I love the church and I love people who serve in the church. But we have had to so often in our church just remind people. For example, Sunday morning, it was just a few weeks ago, I'm standing in our back room with our band, and we're about to go on stage, and everybody's kind of like this, and I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, we're all just tired, and the sound, we had some problems, and the first service went way too long, and so now we barely have a little bit of time, and I just had to call time out and say, hey, why are we doing this? Why are you going up there? Because if we forget why we're doing it, if we forget the heart with which we're supposed to have, we will become focused, and all we will see is the problems and not the opportunities. So anyway, that little rabbit trail there, so that was a freebie. But, verse 6, verse 5, in your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. So Jesus, who is to be the focus of everything we do, Paul says that we're supposed to have the same mindset as him. And what Paul does now, he actually outlines this mindset. Because listen, I want you to now, as I read these next few verses, this is literally the mindset that we are now to have. So get ready, because here it comes, because this is the mindset that each one of us is to have in the area that we are serving. Verse 6, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever thought about the fact Jesus never pulls a God card? Jesus never pulls a God card. And what I mean by that is he never went and said, hey, I'm the Son of God. Good grief, bring me something to eat. I'm the Son of God. Move aside, let me through. I'm the Son of God. Why am I standing and not sitting? I'm the Son of God. Why am I having to do this and you're not doing it for me? Jesus, who is the Son of God, who is the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Jesus never once used his equality with God to minimize the people he came to serve. If that is the mindset that Jesus had towards you and I, literally willing to be, seen as equal with humanity so that he could serve them, who are we to think that we should be anything else? Jesus wasn't focused on making sure everyone knew that he was the most important person in the room. That just always hits me. That Jesus, who is the Son of God, never walked into a room and said, hey, I'm by far the most important person in the room. Serve me. He was always and always serving the least in the community and the people who needed him. He went into the places where most people wouldn't ever have wanted to go. That was who Jesus was willing to serve. He never saw himself as too good to be with certain people. He didn't walk around saying, I'm the Son of God, so let me go first. Serve me, I'm the Son of God. As a matter of fact, you will have to remember that Jesus was the one who washes his disciples' feet. Jesus was the one who got down on his knees, and these were not nicely manicured feet. Okay, even for us men, we probably have nice feet compared to what I've been in that area. These guys walked around in their sandals. It must have been gross. They didn't exactly clean up all the manure on the street, and who knows what was caked to the bottom of these feet. The Son of God got on his knees and washed their feet. He never once saw himself as superior to the people he came to serve. That is the heart of a servant. I ask you again, if you are tired in serving, what's the condition of your heart? If you feel that God has called you to serve in your school or in your family or in your church or wherever it might be, it is so important for us to recognize and say, do I have the heart of a servant? Do I have the heart of someone who says, I want to do this for the sake of other people? Verse 7, rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Instead of portraying himself as better than people, he made himself literally to be nothing. I always wrestle with this. You wonder how God is all powerful. How do you take the deity of Jesus and wrap it into human flesh? It seems impossible, but that is what happened. Jesus took on the very nature of a servant so that he could serve you and I. Instead of portraying himself as better than everyone, he turned and he humbled himself to serve you and I. Have you ever turned down serving because it was beneath you? You know, that someone else can do that. Nah, I'm not interested in that. That's disgusting. I think this is an important thing for us to wrestle with, because I know for myself sometimes I'm tempted to say, well, you know what, those people, someone else can go visit them, or those people, someone else can whatever, because we may sometimes see ourselves as better than other people, and so we will actually turn down opportunities to serve because we see ourselves as above that. I used to do that, and I'm no longer doing it, and so it's important for us to have the same mindset. Now the Creator allowed himself, think about this for a moment, God allowed himself to be brought into this earth as a human being. I think that this is so important that, and that we allow it to sink in. God, Jesus himself, comes in human likeness. Now, I'm not sure if you understand that, but that is a reverse of the creation event. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, we see that so God created mankind in his own image. Now we see in Jesus coming to the earth, into earth, it's like this reverse of what he had done at creation. He's willing to come to that which was his own. And it's just an amazing thing, and I think sometimes we breeze over that. We're so, oh yeah, I know that that's what God did, and I know that, that whatever it might be, but allow that to sink in, what Jesus was willing to do for you so that you and I could receive the gift of salvation. Now the Creator allowed himself to be created, conceived, born, burped, changed, washed, fed, taught, parented, and the one, like I mentioned, that baffles me the most, confined to a human body. Verse 8, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Ultimately, the unthinkable, the very Son of God, allowing himself to be crucified by the very humans he created. Why? So that he could serve you and I, so that he could serve humanity, by giving his life so that we could have life through him. Jesus did the unthinkable. And Paul is saying here to us, this is the mindset that you and I need to have. So I want to give us something to think about today. I want to challenge you and I to see serving as a non-negotiable. And I just want you to just put that in your head. I think there's a slide for that. Just serving is a non-negotiable. And I want you just to recognize that. And I'm not going to make you say it over and over, but in your heart, you need to just decide today, am I going to make a decision that serving is non-negotiable? Because to make it a negotiable thing, then we can constantly decide whether I will or whether I won't. In your heart, you literally said that I'm going to serve, and it's a non-negotiable. It's one of those things that I'm going to do from now on. Like I said yesterday, when there is a need, we meet a need. See a need, meet a need. It's just so simple. I don't have to, because once we settle that in our hearts, we don't have to decide, should I serve or shouldn't I serve, because we've made serving a non-negotiable. Let me give you an example of how this works in our house. Respect in our home is a non-negotiable. We tell our kids, you can disagree with us. You can push back. They're teenagers now, so when we have a conversation, whether it be politics or religion or, even a scripture passage or, different things in culture, I have no problem with my children disagreeing with me, and I actually enjoy the debate. It's one of my teenage years are the best years, I'm telling you, because you can actually have, these intelligent conversation with them and go back and forth. But I always say to them, regardless of whether you agree with me or not, respect is a non-negotiable. You always respect in our home, especially to your mom. You can disagree with your mom, but you respect her. See, that settles so many things in our home, because my kids don't have to sit there and say, I'm really upset with my mom right now, or I really view this very differently from my dad, and so should I be respectful? Should I yell at him? Should I this? Should I this? No, respect has already been decided. It's a non-negotiable, and it just settles so many things. It already concludes so many debates and so many decisions and all that, and the same is true with serving. If we in our hearts and if we in our minds say serving is a non-negotiable, you will find yourself, there's a whole bunch of decisions that you no longer have to make. Because now when you see a need, okay, serving is a non-negotiable. So do I have the gifts? Am I able to help? It's not, do I want to? Should I? No, I want to. And I should, because serving is a non-negotiable. So I heard that there's a need, and that doesn't mean that I have to do everything. I'm going to go find out, is this the area that I'm best suited to help? But when we decide that serving is a non-negotiable, it changes so many things. Picture for a moment if we treated other areas of our lives like we often treat serving. Just think about that for a moment. Imagine if you showed up at work and it was, negotiable. Do I go to work or not? I'm just going to decide for myself. How well would your company do? Imagine if a team had this decision. Right now the NBA finals are happening, and if some of the key players on both teams were like, it's negotiable. Whether I play, again or not, next game 6 or 5 or whatever it is, I'm going to decide. It's possibly, yay, Toronto, we might actually win, but let's say the top line's like, don't really feel like it. Besides, I heard the band's in town and I kind of like them, and I'm going to go do that instead. That would never work. Imagine the firefighters. We're like, yeah, I see the house on fire, but I know I'm a firefighter, but you're not really feeling it today. Besides, I had my nails done yesterday. Sorry, guys. I had my, why would guys have done their nails? But anyway, and whatever, my firefighters, if they treat it like, what about a police officer? What about these people we depend on, ambulance drivers, the EMS, people like that, and they're like, no, you know what, I just don't feel like it today. And it's negotiable. Yeah, I got the call, but why didn't you go? Well, because I didn't feel like it. Unfortunately, so often in the church, it being negotiable is acceptable. Think about that for a moment. That sometimes in church we treat serving as if it is negotiable and it's acceptable that we treat it that way. You follow me? So I think if we set in our hearts today that serving is a non-negotiable. I'm always, if there's a need, I'm going to recognize that I need to do my part. And maybe I'm not the person for this particular need, but I'm going to see it as something that I need to do. The church is not bricks and wood, chairs, carpet, or rooms and walls. The church is people. So when you serve, you are serving people. And the Bible tells us that when we serve people, we are serving Jesus. Now, I'm going to brag about my church for a moment because I'm the pastor of the church, and I love my church, and I love how my church back home has really come around this idea of helping people with crisis. But what you may not, always see is that not every single person's crisis is a very public one. Sometimes people have struggles and it's very public. They have an illness, or they have, financial problems, or they may have, marriage issues or whatever it might be. And so it's kind of more public and people see it, it's more evident. But sometimes people have struggles in their own lives. And when we don't recognize that when we are serving, for example, picking on ushers again, when you are serving people and they're walking in and you're greeting them and you're smiling at them, you often do, you may see it as handing out a bulletin and shaking a hand, but what you don't see is that you may be the only kind person that individual is going to meet that day. And they may be walking into this church and they may be utterly discouraged, and you greet them and say, hey, I'm so glad you're here, you belong here, welcome here, and that may be the kindest thing that they have heard all day. So I want to share with you some stories that I have heard over the years of people in our church. So when we are serving, we are caring and providing for people. People who may not have, a big public crisis, but nonetheless they are hurting, who are weak, they are empty, they are lonely, they are lost. So here are just a few of the comments that I've heard over the years in my church. A young mom told me that what was sustaining her was that her kids love Sunday school. So I asked her, I said, can I know who the kids' teachers are? And so she told me, and I went and told those Sunday school teachers, you may see that you are just teaching Sunday school, but what you are actually doing is you are giving life to this mother. She's exhausted. She's a single mom, and she's struggling a lot. And the one thing, by you teaching her children loving Sunday school, you are giving life to that mother. So you may think that you're only teaching Sunday school, but what you're actually doing is you are helping an entire family. Another parent told me that at that very moment, what was keeping their child safe was that they were connected to our youth ministry. And this mom said, I have no idea where my kids would be if they were not in youth ministry. I'm not saying that they'd be doing anything weird or awful, but they were very convinced that if their children were not committed to the youth ministry, that they would probably be involved in something else. So again, looking at those youth leaders and say, maybe you think that all you're doing is running a youth program or youth event, and on a Friday night or a Wednesday night or whatever evening you have, but what you are actually doing is you are giving family peace of mind because of the impact that you're having on those students. A woman told me that if it wasn't for the women's ministry, she wouldn't know where to turn. She said that night at women's ministry is the only way that she can escape from the constant demand that is on her. I know my wife is very involved in ministry, and I know sometimes at home she's tired, she's had her own full day, and so now you're making your way to the church to do the women's ministry, and she goes up there, and so sometimes we just need these kind of reminders that by serving in that way, what you are actually doing is you are giving this woman the one thing, it's the one place where she can just say, nothing is expected of me. I can just come here and be served and be refreshed. And sometimes when we are in our area, we may never see that, but we need to recognize that when we are serving, we are helping people. A man told me about a year ago that it was a warm greeting and a handshake from a greeter that had made him glad that he had come to church. This was a man, that didn't feel very well accepted and struggled sometimes with, connecting to the church. And he said that handshake, that greeting in the morning was something that made him feel welcomed. I had another young man tell me, he sent it our assistant at the church an email, and she said, the pastor said this Sunday, and I just wanted to let you know what was going on in my life. A young man, first time in our church, woke up that morning, made a decision that day he was going to end his life. And so what he decided to do, he said, I'm going to give church one more chance. And so he came to our church. And I have no idea. I went to the front of the church like I always do. And this Sunday, I just simply said, I want you to all know you are loved here. And that if you need a place to belong, you belong here, and we love you. And I just continued right on. And he said, by those few words, he decided to give life another chance. I spoke with a person who arrived at our church for the first English service. We have 3 services in our church. They sat through the entire first service, too nervous to go in. And finally, the second English service started, and they're like, okay, I got to go in. And so they went in, and the first person they met was this greeter. And they're just like, hey, welcome here. It is so good to see you. And, and our greeters, they're trained. Just because you welcome people at the door, we always say it's okay to leave your post, because if it's a person who's new to your building, our building, they don't know where to go. So you walk them, hey, here's the bathrooms, here's the auditorium, over there's this, because you're new here and we want you to feel welcome. And this person did this, and this person said, I have never experienced, they wrote, I walked in the door and knew that I had made the right decision and that I was at home. All because of a greeter. People have told me that the singing in the church gave them new hope. That simply by singing those songs together, they were so exhausted they wanted to give up, but because the worship band led them in songs, that suddenly they had some hope again. I got an email from people who said that who don't attend our church, but because they watch it online, they're able to enjoy the services. I had a man from Ohio call me not too long ago, and he says, Pastor, I just want you to tell you, I've watched all your sermons online, and I want you to say that the sermon on this and this day, because of that sermon, I'm giving church another chance. And sometimes as a church, we may say, oh, the money we give and the technology we have, why do we need this? And we are serving our community, and it's having an impact. Because of the generosity of people in our church, we're able to feed children in 3 different schools. And we're giving them breakfast. These are often children whose parents don't even wake up in the morning to see them off to school. These are kids who show up at school, and the only food they've had is maybe some crackers from the night before. And so our people go along with other churches and other people, and they go there and they make them a simple breakfast every single school day so that these kids can have a little something to eat. When you are serving, you are not filling some position, you are helping people. I don't care if you're putting butter on toast and jam on toast. When you give that to someone, you have now helped a human being. And then lastly, we started this thing in our community called The Bridge. Because here's what we realized. In our nice little Leamington community, we had dozens and dozens of students, high school students, who had no place to sleep. And so they were couch surfing. And so we as a church, and together with other churches in our whole community, got together and said, this is ridiculous. We have to do something. So as a church, we met with other church leaders, and there's another church in our town. They just they had the resources and they had the skills, and so they really grabbed this thing and ran with it. And I'm so thankful for that church and the heart that they have for the community as well. And now suddenly, just this year, one of our wealthy businessmen in our community gave a $1.4 million donation so that we can build housing for students who do not have any place to sleep. And so simply by us saying we care about the community, and by us as a few churches saying we need to do something about this community, it woke up our wealthy people in our neighborhoods and said, we will do what we can do, and you guys do what you can do. And it's been a beautiful relationship, and we're looking forward to what God will do with that. Listen to me carefully. When we serve, we are impacting the lives of people. If you're sitting on a board here, if you're a deacon, if you're a youth ministry, if you're an usher, if you're running sound, if you're leading worship, if you're whatever, children's ministry, parking lot, custodian, I don't care what area you serve in, when you are serving, you are impacting the lives of people. You never know the lasting impact you may have. You may see it as an inconvenience sometime. You may look at it and say, man, that was just, what a pain. I got to go to church again and got to do this again and this and this and this. I won't share my story here, but I have people in my life that because of the way they served in our church when I was a teenager, it had a lasting impact on me. And I believe it had a huge impact on me giving my life to Christ. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. I invite you to decide to make serving a non-negotiable for you. And that in every single area of your life, you're going to say, God, how do you want to use me to serve in this area? Whether it's at your home or whether it's at your school or wherever it may, how do you want to use me? Because if you're going to use me to serve in whatever area you are calling me, I recognize that by doing that, I am impacting the lives of people. Maria and I made the decision years ago that we were going to live in kind of a sketchy part of town. As a matter of fact, most people would call our area of town the ghetto of Leamington. Now, it's hardly like the big city ghetto, but we live in a pretty rough area of town. Our house has been broken into many times. And so it's not always the safest place, and it's pretty much a regular thing to see something crazy in our neighborhood. And people have asked us so many times, why do you guys live there? Why don't you move? And, we have a smaller, older house, and it's on a corner lot, and you get church people coming over, and you can kind of tell some, especially if it's the first time at our house, they're like, oh, you guys live here? Like, why do you live here? Here's the attitude that we've decided. Maybe one day we're going to move out, because I think at some point we may just be tired of it ourselves. But the question is, could we afford better? Yes, we could. Could we move somewhere nicer? Yes, we could. But here's the attitude in the heart, and I'm not saying this to brag or to imply anything, but for us, for Maria and I, we feel that this is what God has called us to do. And I think he kind of laid on our heart one day and said, Ike and Maria, if everyone moves out of this community, if all the healthy people leave, what's left? So you know what we've actually done? We've recruited people to move into the community with us. And we have more and more church people now living in our neighborhood. And I'm telling you, it makes a difference. Because when we are serving people, we are impacting. When we are serving, we are impacting the lives of people. I want to tell you just about, I need to wrap up because I know my time is kind of coming to an end, but I want to tell you just about a few people in our neighborhood. We have a man by the name of Joe. Joe yells at his wife 24 hours a day, and she yells at him 24 hours a day. Joe, I don't know if he's completely mentally there. And so I don't have a very good connection with Joe, but one of the other neighbors does. And so me and that other neighbor, we just kind of keep an eye on Joe. And sometimes, the other neighbor who has a much better relationship with him is able to say, hey, Joe, just relax. Last summer, it was very, very hot in Leamington. So Maria and I were like, hey, he has no air conditioner. And so I went and brought him my air conditioner, just a window unit, and I brought it there. And the next day I'm walking by his house, and all its windows are open, and I noticed that he has the air conditioner sitting in the middle of his house running. And I'm like, this is defeating the purpose, Joe. This is not how this works. And sometimes it's so frustrating because at 11 o'clock every single night, Joe is screaming at his wife. And sometimes I want to just go out there and tell him how I feel. I have no idea if us being kind to Joe and his wife is making any difference, but we feel that that's what God is calling us to. Then we have a wonderful lady living close to us. Her name is Ann. And one day we had them over at our house for supper and just got talking to them, and we just found out about some of the stuff that's going on in Ann's life. And then we found out about just some of the condition of her house. Every time it rained, water would just pour into her house. I don't have the financial resources to do this, but I have influence. And so I decided, you know what? I can't go up there and fix her roof. I don't have the skill for that, but I have influence. Serving is a non-negotiable. So guess what? I'm going to use my influence to get other people to do what needs to be done. So I called a couple of our roofing companies, and I said to them, if the church pays for the material, will you come and put the roof on? Within 4 hours, we bought the material. Sorry, I should clarify. It wasn't 4 hours after that. We set a time for when it was going to happen. Within 4 hours, they had that roof done, and she's had no more leaking in her roof. And another guy drove by from our church and saw what was happening, and he's like, I'll come and put all the eaves trough on. I'll come and fix all this. And very quickly, all this stuff got happened. I want to tell you a really interesting thing. We've been inviting Ann and her daughter to our church for a long time, and finally one Sunday they decided to come. And guess what we were speaking and what I was preaching on that Sunday? That very Sunday that she came to church, I was preaching on generosity. And she told me that I had no problem believing you because I witnessed your church doing it for real. Imagine if we would have done nothing for her, and I'm up here preaching on generosity. I would have looked like a hypocrite. When we serve, we impact people. Literally a few weeks ago, we had a lunatic come right into our house. He was sky high on meth, freaking out, and it's scary. The cops ended up having to come, drag him out of our house. One of my neighbors came, and I hated it because he actually got between me and my kids, and I couldn't get into the house, and my kids are in the house, and it was tense. And sometimes we say in those moments, like, is it safe to live here? But if everybody leaves, if we all decide this is inconvenient, this isn't good, if everybody decides to only stay where it's comfortable, then eventually who serves those people who need us so desperately? If we aren't careful, we can easily see ourselves as better than other people. And we could see ourselves as, I have a job to do, and this has nothing to do with my job, and so therefore I'm just going to disconnect myself. I want to challenge you again and again and again to have the heart of a servant, to tell yourself tonight, serving is a non-negotiable, and that if God wants to use you, when you are serving, you are making an impact in people's lives. We are called to serve. We are called to have a heart of a servant. So I want to just conclude by asking you a few questions. Tonight, as you examine yourself, would you be able to say honestly that you have a heart of a servant? Or is it important for you tonight to maybe say, okay, God, I've been doing this for a long time, and I want to be reminded again that I'm really doing this for you. That I love you, Jesus, and I recognize what you did in my life, and I want to be used by you. So forgive me that I've made it about me. Forgive me that I've got frustrated in my area of service and that I became selfish and that it's all about me. I want it to be about you again. So God, give me a heart again for what you called me to do. Are you willing to humble yourself in order to serve other people? Are you willing, at youth retreat, we talked about this quite a bit, you may remember, I said, are you willing to go sit with kids that no one else likes? Are you willing to do the jobs that no one else wants to do? Are you willing to humble yourself in order to serve others? Will you make serving a non-negotiable, whether it's in the church or outside the church? So that's to you as individuals. Now let me ask you as a corporate church, as a congregation. Do you, as a church, have the heart of a servant? Do you see Sublette as an inconvenience? Or do you see it as an opportunity to express the love of Jesus? Do you see the people, I don't know, the demographic of this town? Do you see the people that are in your community? Do you see them as an inconvenience, as a frustration? Or do you as a congregation look at this community and look at the surrounding community and say, this is where God has placed us. And because this is where God has placed us, this is where we are supposed to serve. And because this is where God has called us to serve, then we will recognize that whatever we are doing as a church, when we are serving, we are making an impact on human beings, on people, something that will last forever. I hope you aren't hearing me ask these questions as a guilt trip, but I trust that for each one of you, this would just stir in you a desire to be in a right place with God so that you can continue to serve in the areas that God has called you to. And so at this time, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to just, again, leave it to you guys that however you want to wrap this up. And I think the team is coming up to do a closing song, but before you come up, let me just pray. And if afterwards, maybe you as a church, maybe you as a congregation together need to just ask yourself those questions. And I trust that every single one of you here isn't now going, oh man, I feel so bad. I hope that instead of guilt, I hope what you hear instead is opportunity and that you are inspired. Because man, we have an opportunity. And I am so thankful for each one of you and the willingness to be here and to listen like this. So let's pray and then let's conclude. Jesus, I got to start by just acknowledging that much of what I said here tonight is so much easier for me to say than to do sometimes. I think every single one of us here would probably say, yeah, I want to have serving as a non-negotiable in my life as long as it's this, or this. Jesus, we saw that in the Garden of Gethsemane. In that moment when the reality hit you, that you were going to die, that you were going to take the sins of the world upon yourself, you asked the Father, is there another way? 3 times you asked, is there another way? Can this cup, can this be taken from me? And Jesus, when it was obvious that it was not going to happen, that there was no other way for sin to be forgiven, Jesus, you did what you came to do. So we thank you for that. We thank you for dying on the cross for us. And so Jesus, tonight, I pray that maybe some of us would look at our things and say, man, is there someone else that can do this? Or is there something else that we can done? But God, if we recognize in our heart today that the area that you have called us to is where you want us, then we put our heads down and we acknowledge it and we accept it and we thank you for the opportunity to serve where you have called us to serve. I pray, Lord, for those who are tired in this church of serving in their area, I pray that you would give them fresh energy. I pray that you would give them new vision. I pray for the leaders of this church that they would have a renewed heart and mind for this community. I pray for this congregation that when they look at the community of Sublette and the surrounding towns, I pray, God, that they would see the opportunities that they have as a church. This isn't a burden, God. This is the joy set before us so that we can serve those that you have placed in our path. I pray that you would multiply this church. I pray that every single person who walks into this area would immediately sense that this is a congregation who loves you and who has a heart to serve you. So we thank you for what you will do. We thank you for your time. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.